Yeah, see, Diorix should have gone to Shanghai. T1 doesn't deserve the spot. And I'm just going to be sitting there like, hello, everyone. Hello, YouTube. Welcome back to another week and what is going to be our final week of VCT Pacific Stage 1 rankings. It's basically going to be a review. We just wrapped up the grand finals for the mid-season playoffs, which were the Stage 1 playoffs. And we had Paper X rising back to the top, reclaiming their spot as the best in Pacific. Gen G taking second place after a very, very exciting grand final. If you didn't watch that, you should definitely go watch it, because some of those maps were some of the best Valorant that I've had the joy of casting. Absolutely, for sure. But with that said, obviously we were tracking all the teams week by week, kind of seeing how our opinions change, through and through. And now that everything is done and teams are prepping to go to Masters Shanghai, I want to do a quick review. We'll compare it to before playoffs, and then we will also compare it to the very beginning of the season. So let's dive right in. Just so we're very clear, this title says Final Stage 1 rankings, but there may be differences to the actual rankings at the end of playoffs. I don't know yet. I haven't actually quite thought through this before we started recording. I thought about it a little bit. But anyway, let's compare how preseason looked to post the league play. So once we got to see all the teams go up against their opponents in the other group. So initially, I had Gen G, Paper X T1 and going to Shanghai. That was kind of my prediction of power level. Then I ranked Team Secret pretty high as a very strong gatekeeper team, but maybe having a bit more consistency. My hopium for RQ was reasonable, I would say. I was down low on DRX, I think also because of the Bane news. Bane basically being brought up like very last minute, and then Flashback stepping down from the starting roster, much more last minute, things like that. I think this might have even been before the Flashback news. I'm not quite sure. Then I had Talon basically just kind of like neutral. I was pretty down on Zeta. I was actually, I had some hope for DFM, and then I was pretty down on GE and Bleed. Now, once we saw the teams play against their opponents in the other group, DRX had gone 5-0, so, it just would have been ridiculous for me to not rank them at the top. Paper X was still competing relatively well at the top, but they got knocked down just because DRX rose. Gen G was, they were holding on. Secret was doing pretty decent. Talon had really risen for me. And then T1 really disappointed us going into playoffs to the point where I didn't really have much faith. And RQ, I mean, let's just say it like it is. I think this was it was a stage 1 that proved what they could do, but was disappointing if you had always had faith in what they could do, if that makes sense. Right? So it was disappointing if you were me, but for all of you guys that always make fun of me for being an RQ Glazer, it was probably like a very, very, very slightly eye-opening season. Zeta was basically right there, and then DFM ended up being much more disappointing after a bit of a rise. So, having seen playoffs, how did things change? So, first of all, most reasonably, the teams that didn't make it to playoffs shouldn't really change too much unless we want to really downgrade a team from playoffs, right? So, let's just keep these guys here. I kind of want to reserve our RQ slot as well, but we won't go that far. After playoffs, does my opinion change about any of these things? Well, it definitely does, because DRX is definitely not number 1, because if they were number 1, they'd be going to Shanghai. They might be somewhere around here. I think there is no doubt that Paper X has proven that they are number 1 right now. I mean, they've just been playing better and better each match that they do. They've also... Here's the thing for me, chat. I think when I finally was like, you know what, Paper X they're just going to be the best team in Pacific right now, is when they changed their Lotus comp and they brought out the Breach. And the reason I say that is because before that, they would play Jet Raze, but also play Cypher, right? So they play single Initiator and then Omen Jet Raze. And then they play the Cypher on Forsaken. And it was good. Like, it was fine. It got the job done. But mostly it got the job done because Forsaken's an absolute ratty animal with the Odin. And then everyone else also is just amazing fraggers. And that's always been the Paper X way. So they could come up with comps that aren't great and still get by, right? And while there are also comps where it's just like, only Paper X can do it, like some of the Reyna comps on Bind and Ascent. Sure, I absolutely respect it. I actually love it. That Lotus comp, it was not like Listen, you were just playing double duelists for the sake of playing double duelists, right? I mean, yeah, you had a Sky and you overall knew how to play Lotus. Like you understood what was important and what wasn't, but it didn't really all gel together. So I've said it time and time again on broadcasts, like they got to come up with a new Lotus comp. And then they brought out the Breach and I was like, oh, well, this is good. It's got way more setup for both of their duelists. Now the double dive has even more meaning because you can erase more angles with the Breach. It's got further reach after you go in aggro, so you can hold onto the post plant better. You can push out of the post plant better. And once I saw that, I was like, okay, now they're in the zone, rediscovering their own meta for themselves. And that's very promising. I think that's when I was like, you know what? They're right back. They're right back on their way to going to the top. I still had a lot of hope for Gen G, but I think I would have, even if Gen G had won the finals, I think I might have been inclined to give Paper X the edge in my overall rankings. But with that said, Paper X, they even show the endurance to get through that best of 5 once again, at least in Pacific. And they're looking good. And then the map draft was fine too. So it's all great. Chat saying rank 1 should be texture. There might be an argument for that, but we won't go that far yet. I'm just gonna listen. I'm sorry for any Team Secret fans out there, but Team Secret had great ante against Paper X. That was a shining moment. And you know, it's not like their other games were all bad, but they weren't exactly all inspiring. And I think I'm willing to put these 3 teams above them. And it's not just because they got knocked out to T1. And quite frankly, does that mean that I think T1 would beat Team Secret every time they play? No, I don't think so. But in terms of like power ranking, the thing is like this is exactly where Secret always is. Always has been, always is. And hopefully not always will be. But for now, it's looking like it. Right? They play very, very default, work off of the util, have some good ante, some decent mid rounding. I would actually say Jesse has some of the better mid rounding in Pacific. And then you've got a couple cracked aimers, but that's like the perfect recipe for a gatekeeper team. So I think they stay there. The reason this gets tricky is mainly because of this one team. These guys. I have no idea where to rank these guys. I know a lot of people right now they're like, oh, well, the format really screwed DRX over. Just so we're very clear, T1 did beat Gen G to make it to Shanghai. So they're very inconsistent, but they did do it fair and square. So, but then they looked absolutely miserable in the next 2 games. Granted, I've always said it, I think Paper X versus T1 is a really, really, really terrible matchup for them. Because currently T1, they seem like a weaker Paper X to a certain extent. So that's a really bad matchup for them. But then their lower final against Gen G was it was something. It does make... Can we just go on a quick aside here? Everybody remember that tweet that Coach Data made? Like 5 days before their lower final? And he was like, no, Pacific's playing our final weekend on the new patch. But it turns out that was like a communication issue. I had to keep thinking about that during that match. But they're still very inconsistent. So yeah, I don't know if I can put them third. But at that point, I mean, do you put DRX or Talon up there? I rate Talon's potential very high. You know why I hate doing this, chat? The reason I hate doing this is I'm gonna put this up on YouTube, and everyone in the comments are gonna be like, yeah, see, DRX should have gone to Shanghai. T1 doesn't deserve the spot. And I'm just going to be sitting there like, oh, I'm just feeding this. Because, again, just so we're clear, that's not true. Did DRX have tough opponents? Yes, they did. But T1 beat Gen G once. So DRX could have beat Gen G once as well. DRX didn't get eliminated because of the format. Let's just put it that way. They didn't get eliminated because of the format. T1 is just a really, really roller coaster team, right? T1 is just a really, really roller coaster team. So here, yeah, in a vacuum, I think T1 should be 4th. I'm gonna listen. I really, but in a straight comparison, again, not just because Talon had taken down T1. In a straight comparison, I don't think Talon is like a clear step below T1. I don't think so. And mostly this is because I think the ideas they have shown were clearer and better. But to some extent, that also means that T1 is getting by a lot more with their mechanics. So maybe they do deserve to be a step above. So I think this is where I would rank it. So the only thing that really differs from the actual results of the playoffs is DRX above T1. And that's partly just because, it's not like DRX suddenly just got like straight raffle stomped in their games against PaperX and Gen G. They were exciting matches. And then they did very well against the other group, throughout the league stage. So I think it'd just be a shame to knock them down just because they got eliminated. And at the same time, T1 is just very inconsistent. If they had even taken a map against Shinji like super confidently, and the other maps were like much closer, then I think, or if it was like a very close 3-0, I think I'd be comfortable putting T1 in 3rd. But the fact that they're still so inconsistent does worry me a bit. But I've regained some faith in... I've gained enough faith to realize that my hopium in T1 at the beginning of the season was not wrong. It's just that it still remains hopium. I think that's the best way to put it. As for why I put Talon over Team Secret, I think Talon just have clearer ideas. I think they have clear ideas that work more for themselves. Like, I think they have clear ideas on how to characterize themselves. And then also they have... I think they have a little bit more specific ante in terms of like comps and such. TS, basically Talon takes more initiative. That's the best way to put it. Team Secret is much more like, hey, we're just going to play super default and you're going to make mistakes. Whereas Talon is going to be like, we're going to push you to make mistakes. Right? Secret is their antes are much more passive. In some ways, that might be what makes them more consistent overall, but they're much more passive. But Talon has more character, and it's reasonable character. The execution was lacking. The teams and players and coaching staff have all agreed that the execution was lacking, but that also gives me faith that they're going to work on it. They know what they need to work on, and they absolutely have shown improvement. That's the other thing. I think they've been on a mostly upwards trajectory throughout the stage 1, so that's why I'm ranking them above Team Secret. At which point, then, as much as I like the very last bits that we saw from RQ, especially in the match against Shenji, it's like there's not enough data to convince me that I should rank them above when they didn't make it into playoffs, and we saw more from these teams in playoffs. So, unfortunately, RQ sits at 7th. Let's see how then things have changed. If you count mid-stage 1 movement. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I guess just because DFM made such a huge jump, DFM would have made the most moves. Okay. So going before playoffs into actual after playoffs, we've had some movements. So how does this all compare to the beginning of the season? I was curious about this the entire season. I was wondering just overall how volatile were my rankings before stage 1 started. Talon made a huge jump up, but mostly because I didn't have much faith for Talon, very honestly, before the season started. Like, I thought they would look decent, but to me, they were like another Gatekeeper-ish team. But how much of this is really GE and Bleed moving up versus DFM moving down? I mean, no offense to GE and Bleed, but, well, actually... I would say GE, definitely it's GE moving up. I think I had lower faith for GE than what they showed. They looked a lot better than I thought they would, to be very honest. Wow. So overall, I actually got a lot of things wrong. I mean, everyone basically had some micro movements. I guess the +1, like these, somewhat forgivable, I think. It's just between those two. But like DRX, I underrated them quite a bit. Personally, I still stand by and say that I think this was a very pleasantly surprising stage 1 from DRX, considering all the circumstances. Now, if you had told me that you still had faith in them just because of the core and the coaching staff, I think that's also reasonable. But I still think this was a pleasantly surprising stage 1 performance from them. So I'm going to forgive myself for this one. T1, I think this is just accurately represents that the hopium was there, but they're still very inconsistent. I think Talon was a surprise. Talon was a surprise for me. I'll just say it straight up. Talon was a surprise for me. I think Secret and RQ were both a bit more underwhelming than I thought. I thought Secret would basically be the same thing as, what maybe DRX fans had hoped for DRX. Of they've always been so consistent. Team Secret barely made any changes. They're really great anti-team, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought they would be a little bit stronger, but they've returned to just being straight up the Gatekeeper team at 6th place. And then RQ, and we talked about it a little bit. Zeta's the only one I got right. Look at that. Perfect read on Zeta division. GE looked more promising than I thought they would. I'm actually excited to see if they grow further in stage 2. Bleed, again, this is being recorded, by the way, after the news about Ye taking a break came out. So who knows what they're going to look like for stage 2, but I guess they looked ever so slightly better, but mostly also because DFM gave us a lot of hope after beating T1 and then went back to not giving me any hope. While we have this up, let's talk about how much hope do we have for stage 2? So, I mean, let's say top 3, we don't even need to talk about it. T1, I guess we'll find out how much hope we should have based on their performance at Masters Shanghai. But teams that I have a lot of hope for in stage 2 would be Talon. I'm very excited to watch. Excited and or hope. Talon, I'm actually excited to watch. RRQ, I'm still holding out hope. We'll see what the roster shift, how the roster shift impacts them, since Flips is now on the bench, and Estrella is the new IGL going forward, it seems. I'm curious to see how much more GE can grow. And then, I hope DFM does well. I hope Blade does well as well. But the beating T1 magic has worn off for DFM. Okay, it was very strong for me for 2 weeks, and now it's gone. We've ran out of it. The magic has run its course. Yeah. So if there's 3 teams that I'm still kind of excited and or hopeful about, I think that's still a pretty good sign, because that doesn't mean I think the other teams are like going to get worse necessarily. That just means that some of them will still kind of shuffle up. I mean, I think if you're a Zeta fan, there's still reason to be hopeful, but it's just very slow. But Zeta's the reason I power ranked them 8th is because I do think it's going to take them a long time. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't really see any meaningful growth until like the end of stage 2. And maybe that makes them not as fun, but I think you have to go through a long-term project for a team like Zeta. And then Bleed and DFM, we can only hope. Overall, my thoughts looking back at stage 1 of Pacific is I think it was still a really good stage 1. It was very volatile, but a lot of it, I think, also goes to show that teams are growing actively, right? I think the reason some of these teams are so inconsistent and in turmoil is because they're trying to grow actively. Because otherwise, we would have just had straight teams always losing and straight teams always winning, just like we always did in the past. But that's no longer the case. And, you can talk all you want about, well, this team should have won this, and they were just like playing poorly, or they were messing around. But I don't know if that's necessarily it. I think it's also because the meta wasn't quite solidified. And then obviously now we're going to go into a new patch going into Masters Shanghai and stage 2. And now we're seeing that a lot of our teams in Pacific are actually actively trying to carve out their own meta and their own adjustments, which is something that Pacific used to be missing a little bit, other than, the top couple like Paper X and DRX. So overall, I think stage 1 delivered to my expectations. Overall, I think it set a really good course for stage 2 and what to look forward to. And we're also looking at a lot of people saying, like, this one is it for Pacific. You know, people said it last year, and then it wasn't true. And then we all said it for kickoff, and it was true, but Sentinels was really great at the time. But now truly, Masters Shanghai is the one for Pacific. Like, truly. Like, truly. Like, Paper X and Gen G just gave each other so much practice in a best of 5. Like, it has to happen. And then T1 is so inconsistent that teams might not even know how to counter them. The international teams will never know what hit them when they see T1 just performing like a roller coaster on every map. So this really is our best chance for Pacific. So let's just hope. And chat, you know what to hope for. The only way to guarantee that Pacific finally gets it when we think it's the best time for Pacific to win an international trophy is to make sure that 2 Pacific teams get to the final, because then Pacific can't lose the map draft because there's 2 Pacific teams. So that just has to be the thing. It has to be the thing. Because my God, if Paper X or Gen G make it, or even T1, if any of them make it to the grand finals and it's through the upper bracket again, I am going to be so worried. I'm going to be ripping my hair out during that best of 5. I'd almost rather, if there's only going to be one Pacific team that goes to the finals of Masters Shanghai, I'd almost rather it be from the lower finals, because I will just not be comfortable with a Pacific team being favored to win in a grand final. I just can't handle it. I can't handle it anymore. I'd rather they be the underdog going into the grand final. That has to be it. These are our rankings after stage 1. Obviously, Masters Shanghai coming up. We will be doing Masters Shanghai Power Rankings as well for all the teams going, but that's going to come after we review all the regions separately. So let me know what you thought of Pacific in stage 1. If you followed along, let me know what you thought about the playoffs as well. And also just let me know what you think about the 3 teams going to Shanghai, Paper X, Gen G, and T1. What are your hopes to see from them over in Masters? And do you think that Pacific can finally win a trophy? That's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment and a like. That always helps a ton. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you know exactly when the Shanghai Power Rankings get uploaded. That's going to be it. I'll catch you guys on the next one.